Hi, today we have possibly one of the very oldest items that you'll ever see that NuTone made. And what we have here at the shop today is a NuTone 8-note chime bass from probably the late 1930s. There is no date on it. I'm basing that on the basic design and information that the customer gave me and what little bit of information I've been able to find out in advertisements and things like that. The customer that sent this to me, he said he thought the chime was from the early 1940s, probably 42 or 43, but after having worked on it and looking around at what little bit of information is available on something like this, I think this is probably more like a late 30s chime. I have worked on a chime, a similar chime bass that I know is from 1936, and I think this one is possibly a little later than that, and it's also a higher model than the other one that I've worked on. I'm going to date this as 1938 or 1939 because I really believe that's when it's probably from. This chime bass is from a chime that NuTone called the Majestic 4. And I'm going to read the advertisement that I found about a Majestic 4 to tell you what NuTone said about it. It says, sounds 8 Westminster chime notes for front door with a repeating single tone for rear door and one tone for the side door, equipped with a 20-volt nightlight with a gold tassel pull cord, classic design cover in ivory or walnut Catalan plastic, operates on 110 volts AC, NuTone 20-volt transformer included, and then it has the measurements, and it shows the list price as being $29.50, and that would be for the base, the cover, and the 4 brass tubes. So what we have here is probably the earliest version of a NuTone 8-note Westminster chime, and I think based on other versions of a similar bass that I've seen, this is earlier and probably the pinnacle of the original design that NuTone came up with for a chime like this. This is often referred to as a second generation chime. There was the earliest version, the original version, was a almost fully mechanical chime. It didn't have a clock motor, and I'm going to do a video because I do have one of those. I'm going to do a video about that, and that's an entirely different design of chime. This would be the original motorized 8-note Westminster chime bass that NuTone made for an 8-note Westminster chime. The customer sent it to me to have me service it, repair it, and make it functional again. And while I thought about doing a step-by-step video on how to do that like I've done on other chime basses, I decided that it wasn't a good use of time to do that because in reality, how many of these are actually left out there? They probably aren't that many of them left, and it is rather specialized. I'm not sure that it's something that the average do-it-yourselfer should really fool around with, since there are absolutely zero parts for these. If anything gets broken or damaged or is missing, trying to find parts to repair it or put it back together would be probably impossible. So I decided that I would do all of the work, service it, rebuild it, make it functional again, and then the video is primarily an overview of how it's constructed and how it works, because it is rather unique, and in some respects it's got every bell and whistle that you possibly could have on a door chime that they could come up with, I'm pretty sure. So let's go over what we have and some of the things that makes it unusual compared to chimes then and chimes today. The best place to start is inside, because that's where all of the exciting bits are, although there's some exciting things on the outside also. This would normally mount on the wall like this, and these are where the tubes hang from, and then there's a screw that goes here. When you take the screw out, then it actually folds open, and then you can see what's inside. So let me go ahead and turn this around and show you what we've got. So here's the inside of the front cover of the chime. This is rather unusual, and I've never seen one like this before, and I've actually not seen any information on one like this before, and that's why I think this is an earlier model than the 40s. So what we have here is the basic layout is incorporated into the body of the chime, we actually have a built-in low voltage transformer. This is a 20 volt NuTone transformer, and actually says NuTone here. It's stamped on the frame, and it says that it's a model TR20A, and it's built into the chime. When this type of chime would have been installed, you would have had to wire 110 volts into the chime location along with the low voltage wires for the push buttons to activate the chime. This is very unusual in today's world. You would not ever see something like this in a modern door chime, but I guess in the 30s this was okay to do. So these are the wires that would connect to the 110 house wiring to power the transformer, and then the transformer steps the voltage down to 20, and it's distributed throughout the chime to make it operate. So we have a transformer here, we have a porcelain or ceramic lamp socket here, and the lamp socket is 110 volts. And that's one of the reasons that I believe that this is earlier than the advertisement, because the advertisement I read talks about a 20 volt nightlight, and a 20 volt nightlight leads me to believe that it would have been a nightlight that was powered off the transformer itself, and in this case this is powered on 110, so that's why I think this is earlier. There is a pull chain switch here with a little pull chain here that you can use to turn the light on and off, and according to the advertisement it would have come with a gold tassel pull cord, and that sounds pretty fancy. I'm assuming it would have a beaded chain with a tassel on the end that would hang down near the tube so it was easy to turn it on and off. Over here we have an electric motor gear drive assembly. Unlike other later NuTone chimes which use Telecron motor assemblies, this assembly, as far as I can tell, I don't believe it to be a Telecron unit. It doesn't have any identification on it as to who made it for NuTone, and I haven't found any pictures of any Telecron units that look like this, but it is similar in its design. It's a low voltage motor with a gear drive assembly here in the front. Down here we have our 4 solenoid assemblies that pop out to strike the tubes. There is a fuse assembly on the front, and then on the top part of what would be the base here, these are our low voltage wire connections, and these use little knurled nuts that you can easily spin with your finger to open them up and then wrap wires between the nut and the fixed part of the connector, and then you can tighten them back down. These remind me a lot of when I was a kid growing up and I had a Lionel train, and these are the kind of contacts or connections that they use on the transformer. So it must have been a popular thing. I don't think you see this much in products anymore nowadays. It's a fairly full unit. There's not a lot of extra space in here, and I think that wiring in the 110 and bringing in all the low voltage through the hole here in the back will be a little bit of a challenge in neatness to make sure that you get it all in there and it's done properly and safely, because whenever you have high voltage and low voltage in the same box, safety is always a concern. Here on the top of the chime we have some important instructions that NuTone wanted to let us know about. It says never, it's a little hard to read, never oil any part of this mechanism. Place cord of each brass tube assembly around the knurled nut which turns back and forth on the tube support. Hang the tubes as shown in instruction sheet, beginning with the longest, I know it's on the left, something paint covering over the word, regulated tone by moving the tubes back and forth by turning the knurled nut so the tubes give you a balanced volume of tone. Do not tamper with the mechanism inside the case. In other words, keep your hands off. Patent pending, NuTone Chimes Incorporated, Cincinnati, Ohio. It's catalog number 4. It runs on 110 to 120 volt at 50 watts. That's a bit of interesting information. And then down here on the cover we have a really early NuTone product label. It's a little hard to see, I'll zoom in on that for you. It says NuTone Door Chimes, NuTone Chime, Cincinnati, Ohio. So what we have on the front of the chime, so here's the lamp side of the ceramic lamp socket, and I do have to get a bulb for this. This uses a medium base, and although we haven't been able to find out exactly the wattage of the bulb, we've settled on it should be something most likely between 2 and 4 watts. It certainly shouldn't be more than that. If it was, it would be too bright, and it's really more of an accent light. It shines down through the opening in the bottom of the cover and sort of washes the tubes in the wall in light, which makes it kind of nice. Behind here on this metal cover, it's actually stamped that says fuse, and if we take this off, with taking the little knurled nuts off, you can remove the cover and its cardboard insulator. And what we have here is a fuse. There's a fuse holder. It was made by a company called Little Fuse. Little Fuse is still in business, and I actually buy Little Fuse brand fuses when I need them. After repairing the chime and measuring the current across the contacts, I've determined that a 2 amp fuse would be the right choice. I haven't decided yet if I'm going to do a fast acting or a slow blow fuse. I think a slow blow fuse is probably a better choice. And then for convenience, because they were looking out for their customers and thinking of every little detail that they possibly could, over here you have another fuse holder. This isn't actually connected to anything. This is just a place that you can have a spare fuse on the chime in case this fuse goes out. So they were thinking ahead and giving the customer an extra fuse. Here we have sort of a rheostat assembly, and this is essentially the volume control of the chime. The power to the solenoid assemblies goes through the rheostat, and this little brass piece right here, this actually moves up and down. So if you pull it out slightly, it's kind of hard to show, you can pull it out and slide it down. Now instead of touching the first part of the rheostat, it's down here about 2/3, so the electricity has to go through this. That lowers the voltage to the solenoids and they don't strike as hard. If you move it back up, then it's a shorter distance, the voltage isn't dropping as much, and the solenoids strike harder. This is a common design on these really early Series 1 and Series 2 chimes. The other one I have has the same kind of thing. In this particular case, because of the way it's designed, there is a tab here that a wire could have been soldered onto, but in this case all of the wire connections are on the back of the rheostat assembly. The screws are actually the wire connections to go through the rheostat wire. Over here we have an interesting device, and this was somewhat of a mystery as I started to take the chime apart to try to figure out how all of this actually worked, because when I got this it didn't work at all. Some of it was kind of a mystery. It says in the advertisement that it has a repeating tone for the rear door. The way they achieve that is underneath this Bakelite piece here there are 2 contact points. There are 2 bimetal strips, and they have a fine wire wrapped around each one of them, and when they're engaged they work like the contacts in an old-fashioned thermostat. They close, and that makes the connection, and then the electricity flows through the coils that are wrapped around each arm, and as it heats up the bimetal strip deflects and it opens, and then as it cools down it closes again, and it repeats over and over, and that's how you get the repeating tone for the rear door. So it's a mechanical timer essentially. It's a rather clever design. I'm not sure why you would do that exactly, because it only operates while you hold the button down. So I'm not sure exactly why you would stand there and hold the button down, but maybe if it was a delivery person and it was a rear door, they would know to hold the button down and it would strike a single tube over and over. The cycle time between the strike and the pause and the strike seems to be about 5 seconds, and there is actually a little adjustment screw right here which adjusts the gap between the contact points, and perhaps that was intended to change the timing. I'm not really going to fool around with it too much because it does work, and also this customer only has a front door button, so he's not too concerned with it. The other thing that's kind of interesting is there's a little metal piece right here that's like a jumper that goes across. So if you loosen the nuts, you can swing, one side of the jumper is slotted, and you can swing it up out of the way, and that enables the timing circuit, the contacts, or you can put it back across both terminals like it is now, and that essentially bypasses the timing circuit, so it works like a single note rear door chime. Every time you push the button it rings one time. So they gave you the option of how you wanted it to work. So here we have one of the tube supports, and it's a threaded metal screw. It comes in through the back of the cover, and it has a lock nut on it, and there's washers on either side to make sure it doesn't work loose. You have this really nice polished little sort of acorn shaped nut cap on the end of the screw, and then you have this knurled nut like on the inside, and these thread up and down on the threads of the screw. And this essentially, after you hang the tubes on here, you can move the tube further away or closer to the plunger as it pops out, so you can adjust the tonal quality of each tube as they strike. One of the things you have to remember is on a tube like this is somewhat like a musical instrument. While you could simply put it on the wall and hang the tubes as it came out of the box, that may not give you the ideal sound, or it may not give you the sound that you expect, the way you expect it to sound. So you have to do somewhat tuning on the chime, and you would do that by moving these in and out and adjusting how the tubes hang and those kind of things. So it's a little more intricate than some of the more modern ones that they make, but the payoff is they sound really nice. So here we have the heart of the chime, and this is the contact disc, and this shaft here in the center is the actual motor shaft from inside the chime, and the way this operates is actually rather unique. So if you look carefully on the contact disc, you'll see there are these 9 copper contact points that go around the edge, and when the chime operates, you have this arm assembly here that's connected to the motor shaft, and there are 2 layers to the contact arm. There's this part down here, which is shaped to like these contact points. It's like half of a ball that protrudes down below. And then you have the second layer, which is this part here, which is bent at a right angle down to the pointed part down here. So this is a rather clever design. One of the requirements on a chime like this is this would be considered, this is a 4-wire chime. It's just like any other 4-wire NuTone chime. For it to operate correctly, it needs to receive constant power to keep the motor running as it turns through the cycle before it stops here again at the start and stop point. So what you have is around the edge of the contact disc here, there's actually a contact that wraps around the edge of the disc. It's a piece of copper wire or copper metal around the edge, and the pointed part here, as it turns, rubs across the edge of the copper wire, and that's how it picks up power as it runs through the cycle. Let me turn this and get it out of the way a little bit. Got to go carefully, don't want to bend it. Okay, like that. As you reach this part right here, there's a gap. So the pointed part of the contact arm travels all the way around, comes up on this side, and as soon as it gets to the end, it runs off the copper wire into the gap, and it stops automatically. One of the things I noticed when operating this was, as it came off the end of the copper wire here, it would stop almost immediately after it stopped touching the wire, which is what you would expect. There's really no momentum in the motor to keep it running a little bit longer. And when someone pushes the button to activate the chime, you actually have to hold the button down long enough. As you hold the button down, it energizes the motor through the button connection and it starts to turn, but it has to turn all the way from this point where it stopped all the way to this point where it touches the copper wire again and then picks up power to continue on its own. So it's about a second and a half or 2 seconds of button push time before it will continue on its own. That's a fairly long time. I suppose that there were times that people wouldn't push it long enough and it wouldn't make it to the start, and I guess if you were standing at the door and you didn't hear it ring, you would push it again and then it would work. But that's just the way it's made. Once it goes around, then it continues around the contact disc, and the contact point on the arm goes around and touches each of the round contact points, ringing the appropriate solenoid. So it's a rather clever design. It's really not that much more complicated than later designs, which are fundamentally the same idea, just designed in a somewhat different way. The timing of the chimes, of the tube strikes, is dependent entirely on two things. It's the speed of the motor as it goes around the disc, and it's also the space between each contact point. So the way this would work is, as the arm comes across and touches this contact, the solenoid will energize and strike the tube. As long as the moving arm is touching this, the solenoid stays energized. As it moves off the contact point to the middle, it de-energizes and nothing happens until it reaches the next point where it fires off another note, and then it continues on. One of the things that's interesting is we have an 8-note chime, but we actually have 9 contacts. So the 5th contact here, there's nothing connected to it, and the pause between the 4th note and the 5th note is this space, the contact itself, and this space. So it's probably 3 times as long as between each individual note, because you have a pause built into it mechanically. This chime rings at a much more calmer pace than what we would be used to nowadays, but it does have a nice sound to it. So that's a brief overview of possibly one of the earliest NuTone chimes you might ever see. I'm going to go ahead and mount this and hang some tubes on it and ring it for you so you can have some idea, you can see it operate and have some idea what it sounds like. And then I'm going to pack it up and we're going to ship it back to the customer tomorrow. Oh, I've got to go tomorrow and find a bulb for it. But other than that, it's all ready to go. Okay, so I have our late 1930s NuTone Door Chime set up here for testing. I've got 4 tubes hung on the tube hangers. These 3 tubes, 1, 2, and 3, these are actually a set of 3 tubes from this era that I own. But I don't have a 4th tube, a matching tube. So because we get so many different kinds of older NuTone chimes in here for testing, and it's not really possible to have an exact set of tubes for every model that we work on, I have one, what I call a generic working set of tubes. This is one of them out of that set. And I have different cords on them so they can hang on different chimes. And that's what the pink cords are about. It's just so I can complete the set. What you're going to watch for is, as I activate the chime, you're going to see the motor turn the rotor here, and it's going to make connections on the contact board, and the chime's going to ring. So here we go. And that's more or less what a NuTone 8-note chime from the late 1930s sounds like. On the contact board here, there are actually 9 contact points. We have the first 4, which are the first half of the Westminster sequence. Number 5 doesn't actually have anything connected to it, so there's a pause between 4 and what would be 5 down here, and then these 4 are the last 4 notes. The pace of the ring is entirely regulated by the speed that the motor turns the contact point across the contact board. So if we ring it again, there's a fairly decent amount of pause in between each note as the contact under here moves from one contact point to the next. So as it's in between contact points 1 and 2, there's a pause and nothing is happening. When it goes between note 4 and 5, and this contact point here doesn't have anything connected to it, the pause is probably almost 3 times as long, so it rings at a much slower pace than what you might hear if you listen to a more modern chime where they ring somewhat faster. That's pretty much it. This may be your only chance to ever hear a late 1930s NuTone 8-note chime ring. I think it turned out pretty well. I know my customer is very excited about getting it back. He's got the niche in the wall all set up for it, and he's just waiting for me to send it back to him, and that's what I'm going to do tomorrow. So I hope you found this video to be interesting and helpful. I don't know how many of these type of chimes are left in the world, but if you have one, it's well worth fixing and servicing. Nothing sounds like them. It's just a real piece of vintage NuTone history. Anyway, that's all for today. If you like the video, please give it a thumbs up on YouTube. If you like our videos and you learn something from them, subscribe to our YouTube channel. We try to post 1 video a week, and if you subscribe, you'll get a notification letting you know there's a new video. Anyway, that's all for today. See you on the next video.